Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Batman, A Celebration of 75 Years. Now, every January I review different Batman material, be it the comics or graphic novels or the movies. Like, for some reason, January is Batman month for me, so every January I review different Batman comics or different Batman movies. Now, somewhere in the near future I am going to try to do a series of Superman reviews, but I don't know when I'm going to get around to doing that, but January is Batman month, so yeah, this is the first Batman review that I'm doing this month. Now, this book was published in 2014, which was the 75th anniversary of the character of Batman, so this book is celebrating 75 years of this character. So, this book actually features the first Batman story ever written, which is called The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, which was published in Detective Comics issue number 27 in 1939, and this story, of course, was written by Bill Finger and illustrated by Bob Kane, who are the two creators of Batman, and this book features a lot of the earlier Batman stories from Bill Finger and Bob Kane, and it keeps going on all the way into the New 52 era. Now, I have another collection similar to this called Batman: The Greatest Stories Ever Told, which actually has some of the same stories that is in this collection, but I find collections like this to be interesting because it really shows you the evolution of this character. Like, it really shows you how much the character of Batman has changed and evolved over the years. Like, the earlier Batman stories from the late 30s and early 40s were actually pretty dark, at least for their time. Like, looking at them now, they are a little cheesy now, but for their time, I could see them being viewed as very dark, especially the first Batman story, The Case of the Chemical Syndicate, because the villain of that story actually dies a really gruesome death at the end of it. But then by like the 50s and 60s, Batman started to get really cheesy, and that's what the Adam West Batman show was kind of basing itself off of, the Batman comics from the 50s and 60s, which were very much kid-friendly and very corny, and then as the years went on, once you got into the 70s and 80s and 90s, Batman started to get really, really dark. So I would definitely recommend this collection if you're a Batman fan or if you're a fan of comic books in general. Now I want to name off what some of my favorite stories in this collection were. Now, my favorite stories in this collection are The Case of the Chemical Syndicate. Like, it's really cool seeing the first Batman story ever written, and it is actually a really cool little crime story. Another one of my favorite stories in this collection is Beware of Poison Ivy, which was written by Bob Kanigher. I hope I'm saying his last name right, and this was published in 1966. Now, this is the debut of Poison Ivy, who would go on to become a very iconic Batman villain, and it is a really cheesy story, but I thought it was really fun, so it's definitely one of my favorites in this collection. Another one of my favorite stories in this collection is The Secret of the Waiting Graves, which was written by Dennis O'Neil and published in 1970, and I really enjoyed this one, and this one is actually kind of a horror story, and I saw a real EC influence in this story, especially towards the end, and if you've read this story, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Another one of my favorite stories in this book is The Player on the Other Side, which was written by Michael W. Barr, and this was published in 1984. This one is about a criminal called the Wrath who has a personal vendetta against Jim Gordon, and he also dresses very similar to Batman, and pretty much the whole idea of this story is that he's Batman's exact opposite, and you kind of get the idea that he may have became what he was for a very similar reason that Batman became what he was. Another one of my favorite stories in this collection is the story Identity Crisis, which was written by Peter Milligan and published in 1991. This was a really cool story, and it actually has kind of a creepy ending. Like, I would actually consider this one to be kind of a horror story in a way. Another one of my favorite stories in this collection is Broken Bat, which was written by Doug Moench and published in 1993, and this was actually part of the Nightfall story arc, which was the story arc that first introduced Bane. But this is a really good story, but it's part of the Nightfall story arc, and I'm actually going to be reviewing the Nightfall story arc very soon. Another one of my favorite stories in this collection is a story called Airtime, which was published in 2001 and written by Greg Rucka. I hope I'm saying his last name right, and this was a really good story. Another one of my favorites in this collection is the story Trustfall, which was published in 2011 and was actually published as part of the New 52 story arc, The Court of Owls, which was written by Scott Snyder, and this was a really good story. I actually have not yet read the entire thing of The Court of Owls story arc, but I do want to check that out at some point. And the final story in this collection, which is also one of my favorites, is actually a retelling of the case of the Chemical Syndicate story, which was the first Batman story ever written. This one is kind of like a modern retelling of it, although it does have the same type of artwork that the original story had. This story was written by Brad Meltzer, I hope I'm saying his last name right, and this story, I believe, was published exclusively for this collection, but it's pretty much the same story as the original one, only it's done a little more dramatically and goes a little more in-depth into Batman's character. But yeah, those are just some of my favorite stories in this collection, but there are some other really good stories in this collection as well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend Batman: A Celebration of 75 Years if you're a fan of Batman and if you're a comic book fan. And bye.